I wasn't supposed to hear it. Dad had forgotten to end the call, and suddenly his voice seeped into my room like cold air through a cracked window, calm, deliberate, and terrifying. "That old man won't make it past our Thanksgiving surprise," he said. Then came Mom's laughter, soft, amused, cruel. "The estate will finally be ours by Christmas." For a moment I couldn't move. My heart pounded in my ears. They couldn't mean it. But they did. They were talking about Grandfather Harold, my father's father, a man whose name alone opened doors in this city. I thought it had to be a misunderstanding, some twisted joke about inheritance. But then Dad's tone sharpened. "Make sure the wine's ready." He loves that vintage. That was the moment my stomach turned to ice. This wasn't a joke, it was a plan. My hands shook as I ended the call and dialed another number, one I hadn't used in months. It rang twice before his familiar, gravelly voice answered. "Clara? It's late. What's wrong?" I hesitated, my voice barely a whisper. "Grandpa, please, don't come to dinner next week." There was silence, long and heavy, before he spoke again. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll be there, and I won't be alone." When Thanksgiving arrived 5 days later, I finally understood what he meant. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family, the Lennoxes, polished, respectable, envied. Dad managed one of Grandfather's real estate firms. Mom hosted charity galas and smiled for every camera. I was the quiet one, the daughter who believed love was what held us together. But love, I was starting to see, was the illusion they used to hide the rot underneath. After Grandma passed away last year, Grandfather Harold had become quieter, more reclusive. Dad had said, "He's old, Clara. He needs us now more than ever. Let's make this Thanksgiving special for him." At the time, I believed him. I even thought it was sweet, until I realized why he wanted Grandpa under our roof. The week before the dinner, our home turned into a stage. Mom demanded perfection from the staff. No dust, no fingerprints, no mistakes. Harold Lennox notices everything Dad obsessed over the food and the wine. That Bordeaux, it has to be aged properly. Everything was rehearsed. Everything was fake. And as I watched my parents practice their smiles and sweet voices, something inside me shifted. The daughter in me crumbled, and something colder took its place. Because deep down, I knew Thanksgiving wasn't going to be a celebration. It was going to be a trap. But what none of us knew then was that Grandpa had already set his own trap in return. By the time Thanksgiving week arrived, our house in Portland didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a film set. Every corner gleamed too perfectly. Every smile lasted a second too long. Mom floated through the halls giving orders like a director before opening night. "Polish the silver again, Meredith," she snapped at the housekeeper. "Not a single smudge." Mr. Lennox notices everything Dad was just as obsessive. He stood in the kitchen, hunched over the wine list, muttering to himself. He prefers the 2002 Bordeaux, decanted early but not too early. It needs to breathe but not lose its edge. I watched them rehearse kindness. They practiced how they'd greet Grandfather Harold, what to say, when to smile. I even caught Mom standing before the mirror, adjusting her pearls and perfecting her gentle laugh. It made my skin crawl. On the outside, they were the image of refinement, gracious hosts preparing to welcome the family patriarch. But behind every gesture was greed, carefully disguised as gratitude. One night I lingered in the hallway, listening to them whisper. "He trusts us," Mom said quietly. "Once the papers are signed, the estate will transfer within weeks." Dad chuckled low. "And once he's gone, no one will question it. Clara will get her share eventually. Just not yet." My breath caught. Transfer? Papers? Later that night, I crept past Dad's office. His computer screen glowed in the dark. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. And there it was, in bold, property title transfer, draft. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't about business. This was the plan. By Tuesday, the tension was unbearable. During dinner, Mom casually mentioned, "When your grandfather arrives, you'll pour his first glass of wine. He adores you, Clara. He'll never suspect a thing." Her words twisted my stomach. I smiled weakly. pretending I didn't understand, but I did. That night, as rain tapped against my window, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I'd already warned Grandpa once. Should I call again? Should I run? My hands trembled as I reached for my phone. When he answered, his voice was calm, almost eerily so. "Clara, it's late." "What's wrong?" "Please don't come," I whispered. "They're planning something." I heard them. He was silent for several seconds. Then he said, "You did the right thing telling me. Don't worry, I'm handling it, but—" "No buts," he interrupted gently. "Just act normal. Let them think you know nothing." He hung up before I could reply. As I sat there clutching my phone, I realized something chilling. My grandfather wasn't afraid. He was ready. And I was starting to wonder what he was planning in return. The next morning, the mansion buzzed with forced cheer. Mom hummed as she arranged flowers that smelled too sweet, too artificial, filling the air with the scent of lies. Dad paced near the window, his phone pressed to his ear, whispering about schedules, shipments, and final preparations. They thought I didn't notice, but I saw everything. When Mom caught me watching her, she smiled that brittle, sugar-coated smile. "Your grandfather confirmed he's coming," she said, voice light, eyes dark. "Isn't that wonderful, darling?" I managed a nod. "Wonderful!" Inside, I was screaming. By Wednesday night, every detail had been perfected. The china, the polished silver, the matching napkins. Even the scent of cinnamon and pine was calculated. Dad moved through the house like a general preparing for battle. "Everything must go exactly as planned," he said to Mom. "No mistakes. No mistakes. No witnesses. No mercy." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the rain hammer against my window, thinking of Grandpa's words, "Don't worry, I'm handling it." But what did that mean? How could an 80-year-old man handle two people planning to kill him? I reached for my phone, typed a message, deleted it, typed again. "Please don't come." I stared at the screen, waiting for a reply that never came. Thursday morning arrived gray and heavy, the kind of morning that feels like it's holding its breath. Mom was already in the kitchen, her hair pinned perfectly, her voice bright as she instructed the caterers. "Clara, darling, set the table," she said, not looking at me. "Everything must be perfect when your grandfather arrives." I could barely nod. Every plate I placed on the table felt like a countdown. By noon, the house smelled of roasted turkey and warm butter, scents that once meant family and laughter. Now they meant something else entirely. Danger dressed as tradition. Dad kept checking his watch. "He's never late," he muttered. "Harold is too proud for that." "Maybe he changed his mind," I offered, my voice trembling. Mom's gaze snapped to mine. "He wouldn't dare. He knows how much this means to us. The way she said us made my skin crawl." Hours passed. The sun dipped lower, turning the marble floors gold. Then, at exactly 6 o'clock, headlights swept across the long driveway. Mom's smile returned. "Showtime." The doorbell rang. Dad straightened his jacket and opened the door. Grandfather Harold stood there, tall and composed, but he wasn't alone. And the people who stepped in behind him changed everything. The moment the door opened, time seemed to slow. Dad froze, his rehearsed smile stiff on his face. Mom's hand hovered midair, clutching the pearl necklace at her throat. Grandfather Harold stood in the doorway, looking taller than I remembered. His silver hair gleamed under the porch light, his long coat dripping from the rain. But it was the two figures behind him that turned my parents' faces to stone. "This is Miss Holloway, my estate attorney," Grandfather said evenly, stepping inside. "And Mr. Rhodes, my head of security." Mom blinked, her voice sharp with forced amusement. "Security? For Thanksgiving dinner?" Grandfather smiled faintly. "Just a precaution, Laura. You can never be too careful, especially with family." His words sliced through the air like glass. Dad forced a laugh. "Surely that's unnecessary, Father." "Perhaps," Grandfather replied, hanging his coat with deliberate calm. "But I've found peace of mind to be worth more than wine or company these days." I watched the exchange in silence. My pulse thundered. There was something electric in the air, an unspoken awareness that everyone in the room knew more than they were saying. "Shall we?" Grandfather said at last, gesturing toward the dining room. The table shimmered beneath the chandelier. Candles flickered, crystal glasses sparkled, every dish arranged with surgical precision. It should have been beautiful, but all I saw was tension hidden beneath polish. We sat in a perfect triangle. Grandfather at the head, my parents opposite him, and me between them. The air was thick enough to choke on. Grandfather's knife slid through the turkey with slow, steady grace. "Daniel," he said casually, "I heard the Portland branch of the firm is still struggling. Is that true?" Dad's smile faltered. "We're managing, Father. Growth just takes time." "Ah," Harold murmured, 30 years of my life's work and still struggling, curious." The silence that followed was sharp as a blade. Even the ticking of the antique clock seemed too loud. Mom cleared her throat. "Let's keep business off the table tonight. This is family time." "Of course," Grandfather said mildly. "Then let's talk about family." His gaze drifted to me. "Clara, dear, would you pour the wine? I'd like to see how steady your hands are these days." My blood went cold. I reached for the bottle, heart pounding so hard it made my fingers tremble. I filled each glass, the dark red liquid catching the candlelight. When I reached Grandfather's glass, he lifted a hand. "Allow me," he said softly. He poured his own, and in one seamless motion switched it with Dad's. And in that single gesture, I realized the real trap had just been set. Dinner began like a performance everyone had rehearsed too well. Forks moved, polite laughter echoed, and yet the silence beneath it all pulsed like a ticking bomb. Every time Grandfather spoke, my parents flinched as though each word was a test they might fail. He carved his turkey slowly, deliberately, then dabbed at his lips with his napkin. "You know, Daniel," he began, his tone calm but cutting, "your mother used to say Thanksgiving was about gratitude, not greed." Dad's hand tightened around his fork. "We're grateful, Father," he said through a strained smile, "for everything you've done for us." "Are you?" Grandfather's eyes flicked toward Mom. "And you, Laura?" "Of course," she replied quickly, her voice higher than usual. "You've been generous." "Good." Grandfather's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Because I've been thinking about legacy. About who truly deserves to carry it forward." The air seemed to freeze. He turned to me, his gaze softening. "Clara has honesty, integrity, qualities that can't be bought." Mom's knife clinked against her plate. Dad's jaw tensed. "What exactly are you implying?" Grandfather leaned back, calm as ever. "Nothing, Daniel. Just a reminder that greed has consequences." He raised his glass then, Dad's glass, and said evenly, "To family." The words echoed in the candlelight. Dad hesitated but lifted his own glass. Their glasses had been switched earlier, though neither of my parents seemed to realize it. He took a deep drink, and for a brief second, everything was still. Then Dad's expression changed. His smile cracked. Color drained from his face. What did you do?" he gasped, clutching the edge of the table. Grandfather's voice remained steady. "Nothing fatal. Just a small dose of what trust feels like when it's poisoned." Mom shot to her feet. "Harold, this is madness!" "Is it?" he asked, his eyes cold as steel. "Or is it justice?" Dad's hands trembled, his breathing ragged. "You can't prove anything." Grandfather tilted his head toward the end of the table. "Actually, I can." "Mr. Rhodes." The security officer stepped forward and tapped on a tablet. The large screen behind the dining table flickered to life. Then came the voices. Familiar, unmistakable. Dad's voice. "That old man won't make it past Thanksgiving." Mom's laughter. "The estate will be ours by Christmas." Their faces turned ghost white. Dad's knife fell from his shaking hand. Where did you get that?" he stammered. Grandfather's reply was calm, almost kind. "From your own phones. You forgot to hang up." Clara heard everything, and she called me. Both of them turned toward me, their eyes full of disbelief and fury. "You told him?" Mom hissed. "I saved him," I said quietly. "Someone had to." And that was the moment everything inside our family shattered. The room fell into silence so deep that even the flicker of the candles seemed too loud. My parents stared at me as though I were a stranger, someone who had stepped out of the shadows just to ruin them. Dad's face twisted, his voice shaking with rage. "You stupid girl! You've destroyed everything!" "No," Grandfather said quietly, his gaze fixed on him. "You destroyed yourselves." At that, Ms. Holloway, the attorney, stood and placed a leather folder on the table. Her tone was firm, professional, and coldly precise. "As of this morning," she said, "Mr. Harold Lennox has transferred all property and financial assets from the Lennox estate into a charitable foundation, the Lennox Trust, under the management of Miss Clara Lennox." Mom's eyes widened. You gave it to her?" "Not gave," Grandfather corrected, his voice like steel wrapped in silk. "Entrusted, because she's the only one here who's proven herself worthy of it." Dad slammed his hands against the table. "You can't just erase us from everything. We're your blood." Grandfather stood slowly, his shoulders squared despite his age. "Blood means nothing without honor, Daniel." His voice grew louder, harder. "You plotted to kill your own father for money. Tell me, what kind of son does that make you?" "You pushed me to it," Dad shouted, veins bulging at his temples. "You controlled everything, my career, my marriage, this family. You made me desperate." Grandfather's expression darkened. "You mistake control for discipline. I built this family on integrity. You chose to build yours on greed." Mom covered her face, her mascara streaking down her cheeks. "Stop! Both of you, please stop." But Grandfather didn't. His voice was thunder now, echoing off the marble walls. "You wanted my empire? Take it. But know this. You'll live with what you've done. Every word, every recording, every witness, it's all ready for the authorities." My father's defiance crumbled. He sank back into his chair, pale and shaking. Mom sobbed quietly beside him, whispering his name like a prayer. I sat frozen, my heart torn between sorrow and something colder. Clarity. I had never seen my grandfather so fierce, so unyielding. For the first time, I understood what true strength looked like. "Grandpa," I whispered, "please, don't do this." He turned to me, his eyes softening. "I'm not doing this for vengeance, Clara. I'm doing it for truth. They chose deceit. I choose justice." He faced my parents once more. "You plan to end my life for this mansion. Tonight, I end your claim to it." But I didn't yet realize justice was only the beginning of what that night would take from us. For a long, unbearable moment, no one moved. The chandelier's light shimmered across the glasses, catching on the edge of the folder Miss Holloway had laid out, the official papers that erased my parents' dreams in black ink. Dad's voice broke the silence first. "Please, Father," he whispered, his anger gone, replaced by something smaller. Fear. "We can fix this." "We can make it right." Grandfather Harold didn't waver. "You already fixed it," he said, his tone almost gentle, "by revealing who you truly are." Mom's sobs filled the room, raw and panicked. "You can't do this to us. We're family." "Family?" he repeated, shaking his head. "Family protects each other. You plotted to destroy yours." Ms. Holloway began gathering her documents. "Mr. Lennox, everything is signed and filed. The trust is active as of noon today." Dad's hands trembled as he pushed back his chair. "You'll regret this," he said, but the words sounded hollow, a last attempt at control slipping through his fingers. Mr. Rhodes, the security officer, stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Lennox," he said quietly, "do you want me to escort them out?" For a moment, Grandfather looked almost tired, his eyes heavy, the weight of betrayal pressing down on his shoulders. Then he nodded once. "Yes, they no longer belong in this house." Mom's cry was sharp and disbelieving. "You're throwing us out?" "Harold, please." He didn't answer. Mr. Rhodes gestured toward the door, and 2 uniformed guards entered silently. The sight broke something inside me. Mom collapsed against Dad, shaking, her sobs echoing through the hall. Dad stood rigid, his face pale and defeated. He turned once, his eyes meeting mine. For the first time in my life, I saw him not as my father but as a man cornered by his own choices. "Clara," he said quietly, "tell him. Tell him we didn't mean it. I swallowed hard. My voice barely came out. You did mean it. I heard you. The words hit harder than I expected. They hurt me too. The guards led them away. The door closed behind them with a heavy, echoing click that seemed to seal more than just a room. It sealed an era. Grandfather sank back into his chair, his hands trembling slightly. He reached for his untouched glass of wine but didn't drink. Justice, he murmured, staring into the red reflection. That's the real Thanksgiving gift. I reached across the table, laid my hand over his. You didn't just save your life tonight, Grandpa, I whispered. You saved mine too. But as the echo of that closing door faded, I realized the nightmare wasn't over yet. The dining room was silent after the door shut behind my parents. Only the faint tinkling of the chandelier and the whisper of the rain outside filled the air. The candles burned low, their flames trembling like they too were afraid to stay. Grandfather Harold sat unmoving, staring at the table where 2 empty chairs remained. The plates were still full, the food untouched, frozen in time like the last scene of a tragedy. I never thought it would end like this, he said quietly. Not with my own son. His voice cracked at the edges, a sound I'd never heard from him before. It wasn't anger anymore. It was heartbreak. I swallowed hard. You did what you had to do. He shook his head slowly. No, Clara. I did what he made me do. Outside, the wind howled across the lawn, carrying the faint echo of voices. Curious, I walked to the window and peered out into the dark. There, in the glow of the porch light, I saw them, my parents, standing in the driveway shouting at each other. Mom's mascara was streaked down her face. Dad's coat hung loose, his expression twisted in fury. You promised it would work, she screamed. And you're the one who wanted this, he shouted back. You said he was too old, too stubborn. You agreed. Their voices clashed like thunder, raw and venomous, the perfect couple, the picture of grace and wealth, now tearing each other apart in the rain. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling it ache. They're destroying themselves, I whispered. Grandfather joined me at the window, his reflection a calm shadow beside mine. Evil, he said softly, never stays united. It always turns on itself. A few minutes later, flashing lights broke through the darkness, red and blue spinning across the wet stone driveway. 2 police cars pulled up beside the gates. My stomach twisted. You called them? Grandfather nodded slowly. Before dinner. Just in case the officers stepped out, calm but firm, their flashlights cutting through the rain. Mr. Lennox? One of them asked as he entered the doorway. We received your report. Are these the individuals you mentioned? Grandfather pointed toward the driveway. Yes, my son and his wife. You'll find everything you need. Evidence, recordings, documents. The officers exchanged a glance and moved toward my parents. I couldn't hear their words, but I saw the moment Mom's face drained of color when they pulled a small glass vial from her purse. And as the handcuffs clicked shut, I realized the truth was finally louder than their lies. The rain had turned to a cold drizzle, misting across the driveway as the officers questioned my parents. From the window, I could see everything. Mom's trembling hands, Dad's lifeless stare, the glint of metal cuffs in the flashing lights. Mom tried to speak, her voice breaking. You can't do this. This is a misunderstanding. That vial, it's not what it looks like. But the officer's voice cut through her panic, calm and firm. Elaine Lennox, Daniel Lennox, you are under arrest for conspiracy and attempted assault. Mom's scream pierced the night. Dad didn't move. His eyes were distant, hollow, as though the last of his defiance had drained away. Emily? He stopped, catching himself. Clara, please, tell them the truth. Tell them we're not monsters. I opened the front door, stepping into the wet air. The smell of rain and fear mixed like something sour. You planned to kill him, I said softly. I heard you. I warned him. What more truth do you want? Mom's mascara streaked like ink down her face. We did it for you. You would have lost everything when he passed. We were trying to protect our future. No, I whispered, shaking my head. You were trying to steal it. One of the officers read them their rights. Another placed the vial, its label worn, its contents cloudy, into an evidence bag. My parents were led toward the patrol cars. The gravel crunched under their feet, each step sounding like the end of something sacred. As they reached the car, Mom turned one last time, her voice desperate, splintered. "You ruined this family, Clara." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The door closed with a hollow thud, and the car rolled down the long, winding driveway. The flashing lights disappeared into the distance, swallowed by the trees. Silence returned. Grandfather stood beside me, his cane steady against the marble floor. "You were brave," he said quietly. "Braver than I could have asked for." "It doesn't feel like bravery," I murmured. "It feels like losing everything." He looked at me with weary eyes. "Sometimes you have to lose what's rotten to save what's still good." We walked back into the dining room. The candles had burned almost to stubs, wax pooling like tears. The untouched turkey sat at the center of the table, cold now, a feast no one had eaten. I sank into my chair and stared at the empty places where my parents had been. The silence pressed down like a weight I couldn't shake. Grandfather placed a hand on my shoulder. "You still have a family," he said softly. "You have me." But as dawn crept closer, I couldn't help wondering whether either of us would ever truly recover from what this night had cost. Morning crept into the mansion like a timid guest afraid to enter. Pale sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long golden lines across the floor where shadows of last night still lingered. The house felt emptier than ever, too quiet, too still. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. When I walked downstairs, the dining table was exactly as we had left it. Plates untouched, candles melted down to puddles of wax, the faint scent of wine and smoke still hanging in the air. It looked like the aftermath of a battle disguised as dinner. Grandfather Harold sat near the window, a cup of tea cooling beside him. His posture was straight, but his face was tired, lined deeper than I'd ever seen it. For the first time, he looked his age. "Did you sleep at all?" I asked softly. He smiled faintly without looking up. "Sleep feels like a luxury I haven't earned yet." I sat beside him, unsure what to say. Outside, the sky was clear now, the storm gone as if it had never existed. But its damage remained here, in our house, in our hearts. After a long silence, Grandfather spoke again. "When I was younger, I believed wealth could hold a family together. That if I gave enough, built enough, no one would ever turn on me." He sighed, eyes distant. "But greed doesn't come from poverty. It comes from emptiness." I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, that my parents' choices were their own, but the words caught in my throat. He turned to me then, his gaze softer. "You saved me, Clara. You saved this family from itself. But I'm sorry it cost you your innocence." Tears stung my eyes. "I didn't want to be the reason they were taken away." "You weren't," he said. "They chose their path long before last night." We sat in silence, the weight between us both unbearable and somehow comforting. Outside, birds began to sing again, hesitant notes that felt almost like forgiveness. After a while, Grandfather reached for his cane and stood. "It's time to start rebuilding," he said. "Not the mansion, the name, the meaning of being a Lennox." I nodded slowly, wiping my eyes. "Where do we start?" He looked out the window toward the long, empty driveway where police cars had come and gone. "With truth," he said quietly. "Always with truth." As sunlight spread across the room, I glanced at the table one last time. The empty wine glasses gleamed faintly in the morning light, reminders of everything that had been lost and of what had been saved. And in that fragile, golden quiet, I realized that Thanksgiving would never mean the same again. Because sometimes survival is the only thing left to be thankful